Welcome to Anarchic Areopagita. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. I'm your host, John Weeks, and I'm joined today by the great Captain Matthew Hoh. Welcome, Captain.
Hey, John, it's good to see you, man.
It's great to see you. So, Captain, you are a former member of the United States Marines, combat veteran of Iraq, former State Department officer, served in Afghanistan during the Afghan War, and you currently work for the Eisenhower Media Network as an associate director.
Just a senior fellow now. Chris Sorensen's the associate director, and much more.
Senior fellow.
Yeah, much more. He's much more capable and competent than I ever was in that role. So I'm glad for it. Everyone should be glad for it.
Well, sounds like a win-win all around.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just have to do, essentially this, but Chris does the actual work that keeps the organization moving forward.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, you've been doing a great job of doing this. I've been listening to you be interviewed for years now by Scott Horton, Libertarian Institute director. And I've always loved you, one of my favorite guests on his show. But especially since the Russia-Ukraine war and since the Israeli and Hamas war, I found your analysis to be one of the most important go-to. Your writing, your media appearances, your interviews, super knowledgeable, amazing analysis of military affairs and geopolitics, war and peace, but also you bring a really powerful, moral, normative force to the work, which I find so welcome. Because, like years ago when I would listen to you and Scott talk about the war on terrorism, a lot of it was upsetting, but it was kind of more like academic and intellectual. In the past couple of years, it's the upsetting has sort of taken the forefront for me.
Okay.
And so to hear you, with your background, with your authority, say, yeah, this is wrong, has been so powerful for me. And I'm really feel really blessed that you're here on my show today to talk about these issues.
Well, thank you. I appreciate John. It's on you to say that. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm really grateful for what the Libertarian Institute does. I'm not an American libertarian in the sense of the American Libertarian Party, but I certainly have a lot of libertarian aspects to my principles and my political philosophies. I'm on the other side, on the American spectrum. I'm a leftist, but certainly libertarianism is an important part of my political belief system, my political philosophy, but more so like what you all do with the Libertarian Institute by with the books you publish. And if people aren't familiar with like the catalog that you guys have, please, like as soon as we're done talking here, go check that out, because some of the most important books I've read in the last 15 years have come from the Libertarian Institute. And, but also too, all the programs you have, whether it's the podcast, whether it's antiwar.com, connection there, all those different things. And then, of course, all the folks who are part of the Libertarian Institute. So whether it's Kyle and Dave or Scott or, Rachel, who's behind the scenes here, Tommy, I mean, all these wonderful, incredible people. Yeah, I am, grateful for it, because I honestly couldn't do what I've done, say the last 17 years or whatever, been doing this for, without the support of, people like you guys. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the high praise. As you can see in my background, I've got Scott Horton's Provoked. That's one of the books the Institute has published. A lot of good books there. Definitely encourage people to check it out. And I actually got hired by the Institute last year. I'm now an assistant editor. And it's been definitely one of the greatest experiences of my life, just getting to be in the mix, run my ideas by all the brilliant people there, and get their feedback, their mentorship, their guidance. It's it's really, really great. So I believe today is day 11 of the current American-Israeli war on Iran. And I was hoping that we could start by you just giving us sort of your high level take on what's going on, where we are now with this war.
I think we're seeing that the Americans, and when I say the Americans, that very often, factor in, it includes the Israelis into what I'm saying. But let's just, with the Americans, they are very good at waging warfare at the tactical level, and really pretty good at waging warfare at the operational level. So, a tactical level being the day to day, being the planes that are dropping the bombs, the ships that are firing the missiles. Think about vehicles moving out on patrol, right? That's the day to day. That's the tactical level of warfare. Then you have the operational level of warfare, which is obviously the next level up. But that's bringing all those pieces together. And now you're incorporating intelligence, you're incorporating logistics. It's actually, can we keep those missiles resupplied to ships? Can we keep the fuel in the vehicles to keep the patrols running? Those types of things. And the Americans do that really pretty well. I mean, I think there's obviously some issues with the United States' ability to sustain that. But like on a day-to-day level right now, the operational is pretty good for the Americans. Now, what the Americans don't do well, and we're seeing this really play out, and this gets to your question, is at the strategic or at the political levels of warfare, the two highest levels of warfare. And for those who aren't familiar with the structure of the levels of warfare, the political level of warfare is the highest, most important part of warfare. That's it. There's no question. There's no argument. There's no debate about that. That's it. And what you see here is you see an American national security state, a war state, that's unable to exercise and conduct itself in a manner that assures that the political objectives that are put forth by its political leaders are able to be met. Might be a problem here, right, John? Because we have political leaders who can't seem to put forward political objectives to obtain. That might be part of the problem, but we see this over and over again where there just doesn't seem to be an American strategy that is going to lead to the achievement of whatever goals the political leaders are putting forward. And on the Iranian side, though, and that's where I think it would differ too with the Israelis. I think the Israelis are much better at strategic and political levels of warfare than the Americans are as well. But the Iranians certainly are showing this capacity where they're not concerned about the tactical level of warfare. They're not concerned about the operational level of warfare, other than their ability to sustain, missile and drone attacks on Israel and throughout the Gulf countries and whatever other countries Iran wants to expand this war to, as part of their strategy to achieve their political objectives. So the Iranians are showing a degree of competence here that the Americans haven't shown since maybe World War II. This ability to expand the war throughout the region, right? So as well then to curtail the production, not just the shipment, but the production now of fossil fuels in the Persian Gulf region to achieve their political objectives, because they've brought more countries into this war than certainly the U.S. or Israel wanted to have brought in this war. And those countries didn't want to be brought in this war. And so now they're putting that pressure. They're trying to apply leverage on the Americans to end this war before the Americans and the Israelis achieve their goals. Again, whatever those goals might be. And then you have as well then the effect of doing this harm, right? Creating this strangulation of the world economy by shutting off a fifth of its energy supply. To, again, not just now, you just don't have 8 or 9 nations in the Middle East, including Turkey and Greece and Cyprus, that are upset about this. But now you got the entire world. And eventually American consumers are going to be really upset when everyone's prices goes up. Not just you're paying $5-6 a gallon for gasoline, but the fact that everything you eat, everything you consume is now going to be much more expensive, because as many of us have learned, in the last week, fertilizer is tied into the cost of oil, right? So your food you're going to be eating in 6 months or a year is going to be much more expensive than it was, I mean, so it just to say that that's my high level take on this, in the sense of like just how they've conducted themselves, how they have prepared themselves for this, and then we can get into more granular aspects or more details of it. Certainly, the incompetence of the administration. They can't even. They started a war of choice with only 1 in 4 Americans supporting it, according to Reuters. Without even having their messaging tied together or put together. I mean, it's just been, we're on day 11 and these guys are still contradicting themselves every chance they get about what the purpose is of this war, why it was started, or what the objectives or goals are. I mean, so, there is a lot to discuss here. So I'll shut up now.
Amazing analysis. I really love how you break down the tactical, operational, strategic, political. You were the first person I ever heard break it down like that. I was like, oh, it makes so much more sense now.
They teach you that second week of officer school in the military, all branches. I don't know. I think you don't hear people speak about it that way because it is a little it's a little academic. It's a little too much for some people, I think, in a sense of just how searching for the right word here. But, but I think one of the issues you have, though, John, with this is the American military itself, and those who then, by extension, comment on it, don't like it because the Americans don't understand it and the Americans don't follow it, even though show me another understanding, show me another explanation for the hierarchy of war and how those different levels of war interact with each other. Show me your explanation for how war is conducted, and how war is carried out. And I'll start using that one. But this is the one that the American military teaches. This is doctrinally what the American military says. This is how warfare goes. And then for that, as we talk about it, it's for us not to acknowledge that. But I think a lot of that has to do with the American military doesn't like it because they don't do it well. And in particular, you'll see a lot of times the American military will discuss the levels of warfare and they will leave out political. The idea that political is paramount, that political is the highest level of warfare. A lot of men and women don't like that because they want strategic to be the highest level of warfare. They want generals and admirals to be the ones who are really deciding about war. They want to feel that they have the decision about war, the power about war, the meaning of war is resident within the military itself. And it simply is not. It's always been that way. And it always will be that way. I mean, we can go back. We could talk about. You could probably talk about this. Your knowledge of history is incredible. You could talk about this. You could refer to the Greeks or Romans. And discuss campaigns that way, wars that way, and you would see that it works out there as well. The political level warfare is the highest and most important, and whoever can establish what their political objectives are, and then create a strategy to attain those directives, and then actually put into motion operations and then tactics that can achieve that strategy, that's who's going to win the war. And the political objectives have to be clear, but they also have to be viable and they have to be realistic. So if you have political objectives that simply are not realistic, or not viable, then your war is not going to be won. And I think this is why you have American losses, particularly says keep it in the modern era. Right? American losses, one after another. And these losses all tend to look similar. And that's why there's such great commentary, that you're seeing comparing this war in Iran with the war in Iraq 23 years ago. And the parallels, of course, they'll run you right over. The parallels are so strong. But there are also some key differences. The most important, the biggest difference to me, the one that stands out the most, is that at least in 2003, the men and women who led us into that war and who gave us that war, who caused that war, they at least were competent liars. And now here we are suffering through this war with men and women who are incompetent liars. And I think that's one of the big differences between 03 and 26. And why is that important? Because all these things I just said, running my mouth all this time about political objectives, if you don't have clear messaging, if you don't have a well understood narrative that underlines this war, how are you going to have any type of political objectives that can be attained for the war if you can't even get your story straight at the beginning of all this?
Yeah, you mentioned the lack of popular support in the country for this war. And I was thinking recently how we went from the Powell Doctrine in Desert Storm of you got to have the whole country behind you
Yeah.
to the Bush Doctrine in Iraq War II, where, well, I can just go to war as long as I have the American right with me, to now, whatever you want to call this, where apparently it's just like 5 guys in a room who are like, we should do this.
Right.
That's good enough.
Right. Well, remember though, actually, with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, there is the majority public support for that. In the months leading up to the war, that it was the majority support, 55, 60%. And then once the United States got to the invasion, to mid-March of 2003, that support for the war went up to 70%. And it went over 70% after the invasion occurred. And then, April of 2003, George W. Bush's approval rating is 81%, 82%, something like that. So again, they were competent liars, though. And then what they did find, knowing you're right, is that support begins to peel off within the first year of that war. But then Bush wins re-election in November of 2004 because he was able to keep the American right on his side. The Democratic Party, of course, is incompetent, and they ran a terrible candidate that year as well. It's not, you forget that. But, they had a competency, those Republicans, that you just don't see here right now. So, I mean, which is worse? The neoconservatives who are competent and murderous, or these people? I don't even know how to describe them. What adjective to be? What's their descriptor? What the name of them is? These Trumpian loyalists who have no principles and who aren't competent, but are also murderous. Which is worse? I don't know.
Nor do I, but they're both terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
Could we talk about that hierarchy of war within the context of the military industrial complex?
Sure.
And my thinking on that construct has been influenced very heavily by your work. And when I was a kid in the 90s reading about foreign policy and war, I first came across this idea, military industrial complex, attributed to General Eisenhower. And, my basic view on it, I think it was a basic left liberal idea that, the reason we have war is because there's these companies that make money off it. And if it wasn't for these companies, we could just build more schools. And now I don't think that's 100% accurate anymore. And there's a great story about Vladimir Putin. I believe he's talking to a former U.S. ambassador, and he's complaining about the anti-ballistic missiles being placed around his country. And the ambassador's like, yeah, but it's just a military-industrial complex, baby. They're just getting paid. It's a boondoggle. They're ripping off the American taxpayer. And Putin's like, yeah, I understand military-industrial complex, bro. I'm the head of a state in a massive country with nuclear weapons. But, why does that have to be the scam? Ringing my country with these missiles. Why can't a scam be something else? And that really got me thinking. And then I was reading a lot about deep history, going back to the, when our species was living in tribes thousands of years ago. And so I think that we just basically evolved to be upgraded for coalitional proactive aggression, which you could, and even in its simplest manifestations of tribes fighting each other, you could think of as war.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of driving at that thing in our nature. Then as societies get more complex, some people are like, well, we can make, look what I made. This will help you in the war. And now we're in this massively complex society where, we have people who just sit in offices and are trying to sell weapons to the military, even when the military doesn't want them, they get them because what's above them? The political, as you said. Congress is like, no, we're buying those weapons. And so it just seems like this weird paradox that I can't wrap my head around. You said to me once, you pointed out to me, like, you're like, John, in like TV shows and movies or commercials, when they say something is military grade, they're trying to tell you that it's really good. But anyone who's served in the military knows that's kind of a joke. And I see that all the time. I see that in advertising. I see that in movies. I saw a movie with The Rock where he ends up having to like climb up a building that's on fire. And there's a part where he's like they're going in to meet like a boss for a deal or something. And the guy he's with is like, this door is military grade. And I just laugh so hard because I'm like, oh man, it's just everywhere. Whereas like in the military, things are constantly not working, breaking down, the comms are going out, the the weapons platform isn't working. And a lot of that is because of the profits of these companies. I think one example that I read about in the book Kill Chain was the MRAPs, I think they're called, where the original design was that it could withstand like so much explosive force, but they downgraded it because it was harder to like achieve that, and they still wanted to sell it.
Yeah.
And I read stuff like that. That really bothers me. Yeah. Like, I'm like, look, put aside that the war was like wrong or illegal or whatever. These decisions were made at the political level. But these guys that are going out there to fight these wars, these young men and women, like they don't know any of that. They've been raised in the propaganda, and God bless them for wanting to defend their nation. And you're going to put them out there with this subpar equipment. You're going to have tens or maybe low hundreds of soldiers in Iraq get electrocuted in the showers because they're not made right. Like that stuff really bothers me. And it's like, wow, it really is like just a big scam. It's not really about the war at all. But then at the same time, it's like you were saying in the beginning of our talk tonight, the US is really good at this tactical and operational and even kind of strategic level. They can put firepower on targets. They are sailing these super complex ships all around the world. They've got the satellites, and I can't wrap my mind around it. It's like, it's a scam, but it's not complete. It's not completely lies. Like a lot of these weapons do work.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, a lot of them do work. I mean, certainly, hey, the 168 schoolgirls murdered in Manab in Iran, those weapons worked. Those weapons worked exactly as they were supposed to work. And the tactics used, the double tap, worked exactly as that tactic was supposed to work, to kill everybody there, plus those people who responded to it. The intelligence was wrong, but the missiles were accurate. Now, you have issues that we're seeing more and more, and this is where the military-industrial complex and the profits of it, and I'll say a lot of times, I don't like the comparisons of defense budgets where people probably have heard this, the United States spends more on its military than the next 10 nations combined. I don't like that comparison because the American military budget is not meant first and foremost to protect the American people. It's not meant to provide a budget to provide for the national security of the United States. It's primarily meant to provide profits for corporations. And so what you've seen with that type of profit seeking is, essentially the financialization policies of this country that have hollowed everything out, right? We don't make anything here anymore. Things aren't meant to last. You can't even repair the products you own, right? Because the corporations want to make money off of you at every level. So if something you bought, you're not allowed to fix it because the corporation wants to make money from you in order to fix it, right? I mean, it's that idea of financialization of rent seeking,
ending is better than mending.
Sorry?
That's a line from Brave New World. Ending is better than mending.
Yeah,
they've institutionalized exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so you have that now within the U.S. military, where it doesn't seem like the American defense industry can make planes or ships or helicopters or vehicles that aren't maintenance nightmares. And why is that? Well, because then they can repair those planes and those ships, right? Because also as well, there's other things too in terms of like the corruption within the Pentagon, the way the testing program works, the way the generals animals who buy these multi-billion-dollar weapons platforms then go to work for the corporations that they bought these weapons from. I mean, so there is that revolving door, that graft, that corruption as well. But you have these, so the ability for the United States military to sustain itself operationally is, I think, in doubt. Can the United States military, if need be, continue to carry out this war with this tempo, this scope of operations through July or through September or through next December without all of its planes and ships breaking? I don't know. There's a lot of people who doubt that. I'm one of them. As well, then, too, can we even produce the munitions that we would need to sustain a war? And again, put me in the camp of those who say, I don't think they can. And so, you have to wonder then, like, we're spending $1 trillion. What the heck are we getting for this? And I think a couple of examples make the point clear. The fact that right now we have 12 aircraft carriers. One is coming into service, the Kennedy. One is leaving service. Was it Nimitz? But anyway, so we really have 10 that are operational. But we only had 2 available to launch this war with Iran. And one of them was the Ford, which we sent from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to carry out the Maduro kidnapping. And then as she was ending the end of her deployment, we extended her and sent her back across the world to carry out this war, a warship that needs to go home for repairs. The crew needs to rest. There's all kinds of things that need to occur. When you extend these deployments, it's really difficult on both the personnel and the ships, the equipment, et cetera. And out of 8 other ships, we had to send the Ford, though. We didn't have another aircraft carrier. The same thing, too. This is the fact that we've got this war going on and we don't have what's called a Marine Expeditionary Unit, or what the Navy calls an Amphibious Ready Group, which is essentially just 3 ships and 2,000 Marines. Normally, we have 3 of those out, one in East Asia, one in the Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea, and one in Eastern Mediterranean. We have one kind of in East Asia right now, and we've got the one that they moved from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to support the Maduro kidnapping. That means we don't have an amphibious ready group in the region to take care of any contingencies, such as maybe having to evacuate an embassy. It wasn't so long ago that we had to send the Marines into Baghdad to protect the American embassy there because they were afraid it was going to be overrun by Shia militias. The idea of needing such a force in a place like Beirut, so how could we be launching this war? And here we have $1 trillion defense budget. We've got a Marine Corps, it's 175,000 Marines. We've got 300 ships, yet we can't have 3 ships and 2,000 Marines on station to take care of any contingencies that are well understood contingencies, such as like an embassy evacuation in the midst of this war. You have to say, what the heck is going on here? How did we get to this point? But you brought up this question about where the military-industrial complex lays in terms of the reasons for wars. And I agree with you, because certainly it's a proximate or a primary aspect of war. It is, if you're going to bring everybody in who's responsible for this war, you're going to have seats taped off in the front row for the military-industrial complex. But the thing is, we had wars before the military-industrial complex. We had imperial wars before the industrial complex. The banana wars, as they called them in Central America, there was no military-industrial complex. The Spanish-American War, there was no military-industrial complex. The forced openings of Korea and in Japan in the 19th century, there was no military-industrial complex, right? The Mexican-American War, on and on and on. Let's go back to the conquest of North America that genocided Native Americans, right? So what you have, though, is a military-industrial complex that is a manifestation. It's a consequence of empire in this modern age. And I think Dwight Eisenhower explains it that way. He doesn't use the words I use, but I think his point being is that war has become so complex It's so laden with technological requirements for sophisticated vehicles and ships and missiles and planes that you have to have a standing industry to create these things. And then the role of being, this is my words, the role of being a superpower, being one of two empires in a world that always had multiple empires. Now there's only two empires. And so now you do have this imperative or this justification for not just a standing army, something, that throughout our history as a country, there's been arguments about. And certainly you could probably talk about this better than I can, being, an editor at the Libertarian Institute, but the whole creation of the Federal Reserve System, and the tie into having a standing army, right? As well as, you can go back farther than that, the idea of creating this massive, not massive, but an American naval fleet to rival those of the Europeans and the Japanese. All those came into questions of industry and what role it would play in having some form of role for it where it would be making policy. And so I think that's what you have the military industrial complex, where it's a consequence of empire. It's the consequence of empire in this modern age. And so it's not the reason for war. It certainly is a prime culprit in it. There's more there's more lobbyists, more military industrial complex lobbyists on Capitol Hill than there are members of Congress by a factor of two. So certainly there's all that pressure there. But war always seems to have many fathers and mothers. But I think you have to understand our wars, American wars, the reason for them is that we are an empire, and this is what empires do.
My friend Barry Eisler, former CIA officer, has this great thought experiment that he does where he says, just imagine that a Martian came to Earth and you had to explain something to this Martian. I think if a Martian came to Earth right now and I was tasked with explaining to him just like what America is, what this empire is, I'd be like, all right, here's two guys you should keep in your mind. One is Captain Matthew Hoh. I'd give him your whole bio, show him your work. And then I'd say, and the other guy is Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham. And yeah, these guys are both there. This is in the same country. These two people I've just showed you, they're technically on the same team. And I feel like you guys are like the complete polar opposites when it comes to the battlefield, because you've actually been in combat and you can actually talk about logistics and talk about, oh, this weapons platform needs these parts, which are made in this state. He can't do that. All he can do is say, blow them off the face of the map. And the fact that he even talks like that is because, yeah, he's in a room where he's looking at a map. And to him, like, I don't even know, like, how crazy he's really become, but his perspective has been so shaped by just being in these offices, in these rooms, and just where war for him is just giving interviews and going to parties and people saying nice things to him and writing him checks and flying on planes and joking around with John McCain. And it's not just that, oh, he should go fight himself. It's that he has no concept of what war is, and nor is he afraid that someone's going to put, missiles on DC.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Could you take us from like what you would think of as sort of like a flowchart journey from like people like Lindsey Graham in the Oval Office of the president, like, we got to blow them off the map, all the way down the kill chain to the poor guys at the military base or in the combat? And specifically, if you could, like, where's the point where it starts to like shift from the talking points and the political stuff to like actually being concerned about the reality of what's going on?
Right, sure. I will say Have you seen the Netflix television show, The Diplomat?
I have not.
It's a good Kerry Russell and oh shoot, who's the actor? I'll remember him in a minute. But what you just described there, that dissonance between those who've experienced it, those who've lived it, those who understand what it really means, versus those who sit in offices and look at maps on the wall. That show, particularly in its second and third seasons, I think it's been 3 seasons, has done a very good job portraying that, in particular between the character played by Kerry Russell and then the character who Allison Janney plays, the vice president. And particularly one scene where Allison Janney stands in front of a map and explains why it's so important for the United States to, I forget what it was, keep American military bases in Scotland or something like that. And just you could see just the Kerry Russell character, who is the CIA State Department type, a lot of time in the field on the ground, who understands what warfare really means and actually has experience with other people. And I think that's the big thing, is who do these people have experience with? Jim Jones, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps when I was in the Marine Corps, and who became Barack Obama's first national security advisor. He spoke about this in one of Bob Woodward's books, about how the people in the White House, I think he was talking a lot about Rahm Emanuel, simply didn't know what the hell they were talking about. That they knew about maps, and they knew what they read from emails, but they had never been places, and they certainly didn't know anyone. And I think Jones's comment was something along the lines like, pushing back on something being said by, again, someone like Rahm Emanuel, who was Obama's chief of staff. Like, have you ever met this guy? How are you so certain that this is what he's going to do? Have you ever heard him say something like this? Essentially just showing that these people don't have, that their certainty is based upon their own presumptions, based upon their own bias. It essentially is nothing more than an extension of their own ego. And I think that is what you see with guys like Graham. His warmongering is an extension of his own ego. I will say this. I think Graham and I overlap in our understanding of the American empire. I don't know if Graham has ever called it an empire. I don't think he would. I think politically he wouldn't want to do that. But he certainly, if you pull apart what he says about all these wars that he wants the United States to be in, it's clear that he does dress it up with some degree of Manichaean good versus evil, tropes. But also, too, when you read through the lines, he's very clearly saying that our national interest is to dominate. Right. So I don't know if that's subconscious that he's saying that, or he actually is conscious of that understanding. But I think that's his perspective, so I think him and I probably overlap in that way. But as you go down, so you asked about this dissent from those like Lindsey Graham at the top. And we have to remember that there are those in power at the top who do have these experiences. John McCain, absolutely. Guy like Tom Cotton was I knew Tom Cotton in Afghanistan. He's a combat veteran. He was at, he was a rifle platoon leader. He in Baghdad. He saw a lot, but he's a psychopath. And so he's able to those experiences either don't bother him or he lies about it. And, anyway, but, did that descent down that chain of command? It becomes one, I think, of relationships, and who are your relationships with, and to which are you ascribing your concerns? And the farther down the chain of command you go, the more those relationships, I think, become horizontal rather than vertical, right? So I think for many in the chain of command, from let's take it from Pete Hegseth, say, another guy with experience saw warfare, and look at how he is. He looks like Yosemite Sam at the podium in the Pentagon. And so I think when you're looking at these men and women throughout the chain of command, the higher up they are, the more their relationships are vertical. Who's directly above me? Who's subordinate to me? And a lot of it is digital, right? Where their time is spent on computers. Their time is spent looking at maps, And I really love the way you painted that picture of Graham as somebody in an office in DC looking at a map. I mean, I think that really, really grabs the essence of this here. And the lower you go down the chain, the more the relationships become horizontal, so that those who are actually conducting the warfare have responsibilities to other human beings that are also affected by the war. So in those that they're in these horizontal relationships with are the people that they live with. They are their friends. They know one another. If they've been in the unit long enough, they've gone to each other's weddings. They've been around each other's kids' birthday parties, right? I mean, so you have those types of relationships, but you also have horizontal relationships with those on the field of battle as well, or those, in an occupation like Iraq and Afghanistan, where the Iraqis, the Afghans. They may be partner forces, as we call them. So you may have an Afghan infantry platoon or an Iraqi a police unit attached to you, and you get to know those guys, or you get to know the communities. Maybe it's difficult in a lot of those countries, but certainly that was my experience. My first year in Iraq, where I was doing political political work and reconstruction work as a Department of Defense civilian with the State Department team, where I knew a lot of Iraqis in 2004 and 2005. Some of them I got to be very close with. So you have these relationships where now all of a sudden this construct of this war as being about Manichaean issues of good versus evil, when you're able to understand it, you have some degree of strategic empathy, right? And you're able to understand that you are not good and they are not evil. And what we have here is a conflict of interests for people at a higher level. And I think very often that's what differentiates those who actually take part in the war, their understanding of war, their refusal to acknowledge it as something as good versus evil, versus those who are at the higher echelons, those in the higher headquarters, those at the top of the chain of command, who have only, like I said, a vertical relationship with the war, and that they still view it in a righteous way, in a way of good versus evil. And so, rather than what it simply is, a conflict of interests, and that is, I know that is describing war as a conflict of interest is a massive, massive understatement, but I think people maybe get my point with that.
I remember watching war movies 20 years ago, and Black Hawk Down comes to mind, but other films as well. And I had this idea that, oh, there's sort of like this motif or this sort of scene that they'll put in these films where, and I'm like paraphrasing, but like the older soldier is talking to the younger soldier, and he's like, "Let me tell you something, boy. When those bullets start whizzing by your head, God and country, while politics and grand strategies goes out the window, and all that matters is the man on your left and the man on your right." And I remember thinking, like, wait a minute, if that's all that matters, why don't you leave? Why don't you just go home? Like go to the airport and fly home. And then I think, well, part of the reason for that is because in order to generate that um, level of like brotherhood, you need the war. You're not going to do it um, playing paintball, but playing paintball would be a lot better, and no one would have to get killed. Um, and there's a line from Apocalypse Now. I forget the exact line, but Martin Sheen's character is like, "But you learn a lot more about yourself in a war zone than you do work at some factory back in Nebraska," or something like that. And there's sort of like that draw um, that seems to be like then like just part of our species in the deep history, but it's been like weaponized against the soldiers by this system, by these weapons manufacturers and these these politicians in the media, um, to recruit them and to get them to go into these wars.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no military experience, but my understanding is like they're really trying to like put a few guys together and make them bond.
Yeah. Yeah.
To then put them into the combat.
Yeah, I mean, you want to have these bonding experiences, right? I mean, and so that's the idea of training your soldiers and your Marines hard. God, I can't remember the Confederate General Stonewall Jackson quote about that. Something about training his men hard. So, I sweat them today so they don't bleed tomorrow, or something like that. And no, there's a couple aspects of it. One, you want to make sure that your Marines and soldiers experience a lot of misery when they're training, so that when things are real, they're not so concerned about being cold or wet, or they've experienced it before and they know what they have to do to get through it, right? And they're able to focus on the task at hand. I remember my instructors very early on, my first year in the Marine Corps, saying that like basically we're getting used to being miserable. That's the idea here. You're just getting used to being miserable, so that when you're at someplace else where it's very serious, you're not going to be so concerned about being wet and cold. But what you have happens with that though is when you go through these experiences, you have these bonds. Just if for whatever reason, I have reconnected with my friends from when you're a Marine Corps officer, you go through what's called the basic school. It's in Quantico, Virginia. Every Marine Corps officer goes through it. This is what makes one of the things that makes the Marine Corps special or unique. Every Marine officer goes through the same 6-month infantry officer training program. So essentially, every Marine officer, whether they are an infantry officer, a logistician, a pilot, a lawyer, what have you, they all go through the same 6 months of training to be basically competent enough to lead a rifle platoon, an infantry platoon. And, just for whatever reason, John, in the last year, I've reconnected with a lot of these guys. This was 1998. So this is 28 years ago. And I've just, for whatever reason, we've reconnected. And those bonds are all still there. Like that friendship is still there. Some of it is just simply that shared experience. And so that unspoken knowledge between each other of what you all went through, right? And having that commonality, like any other institution that bonds people together, but there's also too the idea that as units train for war, they understand who their people are, so that when you get to war, you're not figuring things out, and you see this a lot of times when units deploy, they'll have like their superstars in the best billets or the billets that are the most responsible. They have, people in places where they're not going to screw things up too badly. They have those who are just simply going to, they'll leave people behind, and I remember a guy being left behind because you always, when you deploy, you have what are called remain behind elements, because there's a lot of things that units have to have done while you're over at war. One of those being what happens when you have casualties. You need officers back in the rear, back at home to take care of such things. And I remember one guy getting left back, and he was a good guy. He was a competent guy. And he was just ruined by it, though, because essentially it's like everyone's going to think I'm a shitbird because they're leaving me behind. Even though the CO, the commanding officer, was very clear. It was like, look, I deployed before. We had guys back in the rear who couldn't get anything done, anything accomplished. And then when we had casualties, it was a nightmare. And there are families whose lives have permanently been harmed because of the casualty process, because of how poorly things were handled by these, poor performers, for lack of a better term, that were left behind. So this time I'm leaving behind somebody competent. You know what I mean? So there's you have that knowledge of who your people are. So there's a lot of things that go into, that type of training, that type of bonding. And then once you're in war, yeah, of course. I mean, it's like any extreme circumstance or any type of trauma producing event. And oftentimes it's over and over and over again. You get this stress bonding. You all get PTSD together, I mean, and then as far as learning about yourself, I guess that's true, but I don't know. I don't buy too much into all that. I mean, I had one experience that I had a major afterwards say to me, "Man, that was really impressive." Blah blah blah. And I said, you know what I learned, sir? I learned you really surprise yourself with what you can do when you really think you're going to die. Like when you're scared that much, you can do a heck of a lot. So I mean, there's a lot of bravado that gets attached to that kind of stuff. But I think many of us will tell you that, like, oh yeah, those great moments where I really stepped up and went beyond, and et cetera, et cetera. It's because I was scared to death. So I don't know. Looking back or talking to other people, I would certainly say warfare is not the way to go about finding yourself. There's other things you can do to find yourself. And when I actually say, John, to young men and women who looking to join the military because they want to prove themselves, they want to do something serious, they want to do something dangerous, if you will, right? They want to do something meaningful. I say, okay, well, join the Coast Guard. I'm a big fan of the Coast Guard. You want to be tough, you want to be brave. Go out on a helicopter in the middle of a storm and jump out of the helicopter and save a boat that just got swamped. I'm not doing that. I mean, you go ahead and do that, right? Or even more, join the Forest Service and become one of those those guys who fight forest fires, who parachute out of the plane into the middle of a wildfire. You want to be hard, you want to be tough, go do that. I mean, that's one way to go about proving yourself, facing danger, what have you, without taking part in organized murder overseas on behalf of the empire, right?
Speaking of taking part in organized murder overseas on behalf of the empire, I find this to also be a bit of a paradox that I have to navigate and kind of struggle with. But I remember in Iraq War II, there were the bumper stickers, support the troops. And the war party used that, anyone who criticized the war would say, you got to support the troops. And people would be like, I do support the troops. I just don't support this war.
Right.
And the comedian Bill Hicks had a joke about Desert Storm where he was like, I was in an awkward position because I supported the war, but I didn't support the troops. And it's funny because he flipped it. And also it's absurd when you put it like that.
Right.
But then his point is kind of like, you're being a little bit absurd too when you say you're against the war, but you support the troops. But he was a communist. I'm not a communist. I was raised with like all the propaganda, like the best we used to have the best propaganda in the world, Captain, in America. We did. We don't anymore. It's shameful. But I was raised in all that propaganda, and I always get along like really, really well with soldiers. I usually get along with police officers too. And, in libertarian circles, there's a bit of a antagonistic, stance on the police, but like I usually get along with like all these guys. Well, at the same time, I recognize that there are with the police massive abuses of power. With the military, of course, there's the history of horrific war crimes. Sometimes because the intelligence is bad, sometimes not. There's a picture that I found when I was reading through Nick Turse's book, Kill Anything That Moves, about America's war in Vietnam. And I'd be looking stuff up as I'm reading the book. And there's one picture, and it's like 3 or 4 U.S. Marines, and they're waterboarding a Vietnamese woman. And I'm looking at the picture, and it was the weirdest experience because I'm like, it's like those are like my guys, but they're kind of like in the position of like the bad guy almost.
Yeah.
If it was reversed, if it was Vietnamese soldiers just waterboarding a U.S. soldier, I'd be horrified. And it's weird for me to like interact with that. And so here we are with this war that I think is completely wrong, completely insane. I thought they were going to do it, but part of me was like, I can't believe they're doing it. Like in the lead up to Iraq War II, I was reading all this anti-war stuff, and I was like, they can't do it. Look, it's been documented. They've been lying about every war since World War II. Of course, the people aren't going to stand for this. And they did it. So I got a good education in the nature of power. But this time I was like, I understand they have the power to do it. I understand nothing can stop them if they want to do it. But it's just so stupid.
Yeah.
This might be one of the stupidest things that's ever an empire has ever done. And so now they've done it. So I'm against it. I think we should bring all the troops home. I think we should stop being an empire. I'd even, like, being sort of a realist, like, support people who just want to retrench as like a hegemon in North and South America. And I don't think it's right for DC to push around Venezuela. But if we were just doing that, that would be better than trying to dominate the entire world and trying to like topple the Kremlin, get us into a nuclear war. You know, I was telling a liberal friend about my concerns about nuclear war, and he just brushed me off and was like, I'm sure our government can shoot down anything coming in over the Atlantic. I was like, dude, they're not coming in over, I'm not talking to you. Stop talking to me. They're coming in over the Arctic, man. And now the cruise ones, maybe you haven't read about this, have you? Or whatever. But
about what the nuclear missiles with the miniature nuclear reactors in them that can fly forever, essentially.
Oh yeah. No, but I'm like, I was like saying is what I said to my friend, or what I was thinking about saying to my friend. He hasn't, you know about it. He doesn't know about it. Yeah, they could come in through like the South where there's like not even pretend defense to give money to the military industrial complex. But so here we are, we're in the war, and I'm against it. And if you were to say to me, like, do you think the life of an American soldier is more important than the life of a foreigner? I'd be like, whoa, when you put it to me like that, like, I got to say, like, no. But part of me does believe yes. Like, part of my psyche deep has been propagandized into me. That, yeah, there's something about like especially when they're young and they're in uniform, that's like sacred in our society.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty sacred in a lot of societies. And so, yeah, it really bothers me. It really bothers me that our soldiers are being killed for this unnecessary war. And the people in charge, as you said, don't even have the decency to lie to us competently.
Yeah.
But then I interact with people like on X who are like, America's a monster and like all the soldiers should die, you know? And I'm like, look, I can understand why you might feel that way, especially if they're like living in a country that's been bombed by America. But I'm an American and I'm not going to cheer for the death of American soldiers. Something that you had pointed out a few times in interviews I've seen is that in these wars, in these terror wars, we lost like a certain number of soldiers, but we also lost a lot of contractors because they're contractors. They can just sort of like brush that aside.
Right.
And it's like, it's because they don't have the same sacred status. So I was like, oh man, I wonder like how many contractors we're losing now. And people aren't even, that's not even gonna get like mentioned on CNN.
Right.
But the idea that like they're lying to us, then this might be actually where they're being competent. They're lying to us about what the casualties are. That's like infuriating. So like as a combat veteran, as someone who's, you know, spoken out against this, but has much love for the troops and can understand the massive propaganda that gets them there in the first place. Like, how do you advise like a civilian like myself tries to navigate that and talk about it?
I would say, John, you know, look, 23 years ago, the people who had my best interest at heart were the people who spoke against the Iraq War, right? All the people who supported the war, lied about it, went along with it because they didn't know any better, said insipid platitudes like support the troops just to get themselves out of the conversation, right? To excuse themselves from maybe not knowing anything about it. Those people didn't have my best interest at heart. The people that had my best interest at heart were those who said this war is wrong, that this war is something that should not be carried out and the troops should come home. Those are the people who had my best interests in mind when they spoke. So I'd say the same thing now. I mean, if this idea that I don't support the war, I don't support the war, but I support the troops. That's, so you want these young men and women to die for nothing? That just makes no sense. It's illogical. It's irrational. It's absurd. So how could you say that, kind of thing. I would, so I think that's essentially what I would say to people who are against this war, is that you're not going to hurt their feelings. And if you do hurt their feelings, so what? You're of their best interest in mind. You don't want them to die in a war that is unwinnable, counterproductive, illegal, immoral, a war of choice, stupid, whatever you want to use to describe it. Why should anyone die in that? And I agree what you said about I'm the same way as you are too. I think we need to end the empire. But, at least when I read, say, the national security strategy that the administration put out back in November or December, whenever they put that out, which they aren't following really at all. But, at least when you read the NSS, you say, okay, I don't agree with this, but I can see the logic here. As you said, retrenching to the Western Hemisphere, anchoring the empire in countries in Central and South America that we can control, that we can dominate. I don't agree with it, but you know what? There's a logic to it. There's an argument to it. There's a method to that madness. This, what we're seeing here, as well as what we saw the Biden administration, the dead hand grip, that white-handed grip on the empire as the world's sole hegemon, as the world's sole superpower, never giving that up. That Biden, Blinken, Sullivan view of the world, that is, I don't know which is worse. That view of the Biden administration, again, this holding on to never giving up the idea of America as the world's superpower, sole superpower, versus this mess, whatever, this Trumpian empire that we have now. So yeah, I mean, but folks who are listening or watching, the thing to do with the soldiers is, the men and women who are over there, is to speak honestly and to speak accurately and to speak compassionately about it, but to be doing so with integrity. And not to pull punches, not to lie about it, not to feel like you can't say that or you're not allowed to say that. I mean, my God, we're supposed to be a republic. And I know we could do a whole episode on how we fell short of that by miles and miles, but at least the spirit of it or your individual capacity within it is to speak with a conscience, right? Do that, at least try and emulate or try and live the values of a citizen in the republic, and so dissent against your government when necessary. William Fulbright, who wrote The Arrogance of Power, during the Vietnam War, Fulbright said that in a democracy, dissent is an act of faith. And I think that's exactly right. So you want to support the troops, do what you believe, follow your conscience, speak accurately and with integrity, and dissent if that's where you are, because that's what's required of you as a citizen within a democracy or within a republic. And again, caveats to how far we fall short of those standards, but at least individually, that spirit can be within us.
I like that. I was just thinking earlier today that, wow, our republic is in the hands of madmen, but it is still a republic. And there is still that responsibility to speak the truth. And I was reading someone who was talking about like the reason, or one of the reasons, that foreign wars, especially imperial wars, lead to loss of freedom at home is because there's that desire to suppress that dissent and to blame that dissent for why the war is a disaster, which to me is so offensive. Like, oh, it's my fault.
Right.
It's my fault that, hey, we're coming up on almost day 12 of this war, guys. Like last time, that's when you had to end it. Like, oh, you better believe harder, boy. And I know, like, I have friends who they're so into the propaganda, they just believe in this, like, in the godlike power of the U.S. military. Like, there's no way that anyone can stand up to it. There was a interview a few days ago where I think it's CNN is interviewing like maybe the foreign minister from Iran, and the CNN guy's like, yeah,
Yes,
so
yeah,
we're,
it was, yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I'm talking
yeah.
about? So he's
It
like,
was, but yeah, Foreign Minister Arachi, yeah, 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 yeah.
he's like, the CNN guy's like, yeah, so you scared? American troops are coming in. The guy's like, we're ready for it, bro. He's like, you're ready for the U.S. military to come in? Like that, he's so in on the propaganda. He's so detached from the reality. He can't even admit that it's like, from this guy's perspective, there's no choice. Anyone who's like paying attention to this can see, yeah, they have no choice. Oh, and just submit, just completely submit, and then like what the Israelis genocide them like Gaza. He actually probably in his mind he probably thinks that Iran started it.
Well, and hey, there was interview prior to that, and the one you're talking about, that might have been the deputy foreign minister. I can't remember. I can't keep these things straight. But at one point, either the foreign minister or the deputy foreign minister spoke early in the war to CNN. Believe it was CNN as well, and they said, "Why are you attacking Qatar and the Emiratis and Saudi?" Right? You know, and the poor guy was just like, "What do you mean they attacked us? What do you mean? Why are we attacking them?" You know, why did we? I think it might have been worse. They may have said something along like, "Why did you launch this war against your neighbors in the region?" And it's just, I mean, yeah, the lack of accountability, as we see people express themselves about this war in our politics and our media, is just really jaw dropping. I mean, it's breathtaking. You know, this idea that even someone like Jon Stewart, who's a darling of the liberal class, you know, he had that monologue where he talked about how Israel and the United States attacked Iran, and then Iran just went crazy and attacked everybody, you know, without the context of like all those countries have American bases in them. Like that's where the war is coming from. And yes, they're lying about it because we have video clips now of American missiles being fired from Kuwait and Bahrain into Iran. I mean, they're literally, launching missiles from the ground there, you know, as well as all the other facilities and the command and control and everything else, you know, but yeah, just the ability to excuse themselves from any accountability in this war, you know, to do everything they can to try and push some degree of blame on a party that is not the aggressor in this conflict is just really some of the best propaganda work, you know, you can imagine. But it is just astounding some of the stuff we're hearing. Yeah, CNN, really, you can see that bias for war, the role that CNN and other corporate media play as leading elements, as the elite within the American empire. This is where you really see it come through. You know, when with Jake Tapper and Aaron Burnett reporting from Tel Aviv or whatever, you know, you really see their role in the empire really demonstrated by their ability to so professionally push forward propaganda. But then it gets caught up when they interview, you know, someone who is not part of the grift. You know, when they interview someone from Iran, say, and they answer back honestly, and they're shocked at what they hear, such as, "No, we actually are looking forward to the invasion. It's going to play right into our plans." You know?
There was a Breitbart article that came out a few weeks before the Maduro kidnapping, and it said something like Maduro threatens to kill U.S. soldiers if we invade.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wow, that's a real headline. And people are reading that like, what a monster.
Exactly.
It's actually, yeah, just like, and I mean, yeah, and that works. There's definitely people who think that either Iran started this or mistakes were made on all sides, but they're just being crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that there's a real possibility of the military draft being activated?
No, I don't think so. I think the political response to that would be so drastic and dramatic. And I think one of the things we're seeing here, one of the things I think, the way I see it, John, the timing of the war, why it was launched now, has a lot to do with both the Israeli and the American elections. Netanyahu actually wants to move the elections up in Israel. This war is very popular in Israel. And so Netanyahu wants to take advantage of that, of course. And here in the United States, I think the Americans viewed it as, we need to get this done as soon as possible. We don't want to be doing this in the months ahead of the November midterms. There's a lot not going well in this country, whether it's the ICE raids on American communities, whether it's the poor shape of the American economy, whether it's all this Epstein stuff. Let's get this over with so that it's something we can point to as another success, but also it's out of the way of the elections. We can concentrate on other things, so I think you had that role being played in terms of the timing. But politically, a draft, no, I don't think that this country would stomach it. I think what you'd see is enhanced inducements to join the military, $100,000 signing bonuses, things like that, things that are just too good for many Americans to pass up, along with a very heavy propaganda campaign, particularly among the MAGA crowd. This is your chance to prove to prove yourself here, to put your money where your mouth is, if you will. I think that's how they would try and fill it out. I mean, the reality is that the American military will have to, if this thing goes, first of all, as everyone knows, the first 6 Americans killed in this war were all reservists. The 3 Americans killed in Jordan in 2024 were reservists. The American military, 40% of our forces in Iraq and Afghanistan were reserve and guard. So the American military has to activate and mobilize the reserve and the National Guard, not to carry out war, but just to carry out its day-to-day operations in, quote, peacetime, unquote. So to go into an actual war that's sustained, that might last for months here, there's going to be a big call up of the reserves and the guard to fill that out. But at some point, that's going to wear thin. This force that we have, both the active, the reserve, and the guard components, are weaker than they were 20 years ago. They're simply not as filled out. They're not as robust. The personnel strength isn't there. And the idea of being able to retain men and women, you're going to have the same problems that you had during the global war on terror. So yeah, the idea of needing a draft, I think, is a pretty realistic expression that comes out of an analysis of the capacity and the capabilities of the American military to sustain an extended campaign to carry out a war. But politically, I just don't see. I don't know how you see it, but I just don't see that being something that would fly in modern United States. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe there's ways to do it where you are drafting, disaffected class, right? Maybe this is the way that you prove to folks with brown skin in this country that they don't need to have ICE kicking down their doors, right? Things like that. I don't know, or you just you offer a ton of money. And I mean, these guys are talking about spending $1.5 trillion on the Pentagon next year. So 100,000 or whatever type of signing bonuses, that's, I don't see I don't see them not doing that.
Yeah, I would feel like I could see Trump saying, do it, we're doing the draft. But then I would think you're looking at potential social collapse, like nightmare. Like they're going to have to bring all the troops home just to restore order.
Right, exactly. People just wouldn't show up. People would, it just would simply be, they'd have it, what if you called out the draft and, called the draft and nobody showed up? I think you'd certainly have that. Yeah.
Do you see what Elon Musk posted?
No.
He said, if there is a draft, Teslas will not be able to be used to flee the country. You can program them to stop at the border. Tesla will not be used to avoid your civic duty. And I was like, I'm not.
He's got a bunch of kids.
I'm not going to get a Tesla. I'm not going to get one of those cars.
Yeah, but Musk, he's got a bunch of kids, and you're certainly not seeing Barron Trump heading towards the military, and not that either I want to see that. I mean, it's I was on with Judge Napolitano today, and he described the draft as slavery. And it's essentially what it is. If you're a civil libertarian, whether, you're on the right or the left in this ridiculous American spectrum we define ourselves by, you can't be for a draft. I mean, how could you be saying that somebody has to give their life for a policy directed by, this is my leftist side now coming out, policy directed by the elites? That's what you say we should allow? Absolutely not. Get out of here, So, yeah.
As as an officer in the Marines, would you prefer to lead a group of volunteers into combat or a group of conscripts?
Oh, volunteers, I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, like the United States Army at the end of the Vietnam War was completely broken. It was completely just not even dysfunctional. It was not functional. It the revolt within the United States Army. I'm not sure how it was in the Marine Corps, but I do know within the United States Army was what the Army itself was saying was the cause of its failures in Vietnam, that the Army couldn't carry out the war. The war had become so unpopular within the Army that the mutinies that were occurring, the refusal to obey orders, the fragging of officers. I wish I could recall, John, off the top of my head. I can't. I'll have to look it up. Some crazy percentage of Army officers in Vietnam were killed and wounded by their own men, like 25% or something amazing, something just absolutely, yeah. And that's how can you fight a war when you're dealing with that type of internal turmoil, with that type of mutiny? And so, yeah, you don't want conscripts, you want volunteers. Now, what you have essentially, though, is the volunteers are not volunteers, really. They're more contract force, right? And you can extend that and call them mercenaries. I mean, that's the same spectrum you're on, the same, it's in the same bracket, but yeah, I mean, the idea of having a conscripted military, particularly in this day and age where the military is so advanced in many ways, it's sophisticated in many ways. Yeah, it's hard to see that for a country as large as the United States. It's very difficult to see that. I mean, certainly there's conscription around the world. The Russians conscript 200,000, I think, men a year. But those conscripted forces don't go to fight in Ukraine. I know there's been examples of some have, and there's some debate about that. But by and large, the Russian conscripts don't go to Ukraine unless that's changed. And if it is, someone in the comments, please, educate me. But the Russians don't need that because the Russians have been recruiting 40,000 men every month, volunteers. But the Western press doesn't call them volunteers. The Western press calls them contracted forces, right? Which is the same thing as our volunteers. They sign up for a contract, you get a signing bonus, you get this, et cetera. It's pathway to the middle class, all the different, all the different benefits that make the American all volunteer force in many ways the recipient of an economic draft, if you will.
The Russian soldiers contracted to invade. The American soldiers volunteered to intervene.
Right. Yes, exactly, man. That's why you're an editor at the Libertarian Institute.
My father was in the U.S. Air Force, and I grew up learning about Vietnam in part by watching movies with him and TV shows about it, and he'd talk about his experiences. And that's where I first came upon this concept of fragging.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always portrayed in the films and TV shows as like the soldiers were like really, really conflicted, and they didn't want to kill this guy because he's a great hero, but like they don't want to die, and it's like they're sad after it. And I had that like idea in my head. That's how it went down. But I know this guy whose father was an assassin for the OSS during World War II.
Oh, wow.
Like straight out of like Inglourious Bastards. He trained at this place called Camp X, which I think is a real place still. And so this guy told me about his father's experiences, and it was like crazy. But then he explains like fragging, but it was they didn't have like, I don't think they had those kind of weapons. Is it fragmentation grenade?
Yeah, fragmentation grenade. It's just a regular hand grenade. That's your basic, normal, run-of-the-mill hand grenades, a fragmentation grenade. Yeah.
So they had those, but he would tell me stories where it'd be like the officer would be like, "We're taking that hill," and they'd be like, "No, like that's a suicide. We should go
Yeah.
around. We should," and someone would just shoot him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, so there's no, I was wrestling with my demons for days. For no, it just happened, and it would just happen. I remember like thinking like, "Wow, that happened in World War II," because I got all the property. That's the good war. And then I was like, "Wow, that really is war. Really is hell. Like you're in hell. Holy shit!
Yeah.
Like, damn! Like you kill your own guy." And it's like, why are you there? And like, and so I just had that in my head when they're like, yeah, we might have to conscript some people, or, you know, and drop ground forces into the mountains of Iran. I'm like, oh, you guys are so detached from like any reality. That's just shocking.
I remember being a kid and watching Dr. Zhivago, and there's a scene where the deserters from the front are marching back into Russia, and the fresh troops are marching towards the front, and then they collide there, they intersect, and the of course the deserting troops are telling the new troops, "Don't go," blah blah blah, and an officer gets on top of a water barrel, and then he falls through the water barrel. It's the whole scene, but then they shoot him, and he had the things he was saying was simply, don't follow these deserters, they're betraying their country, we need you to go and fight the German invaders. you know and I remember being, as a kid, being like, just being sympathetic with that officer and thinking, how could someone shoot him for telling people they need to continue to defend their country, and just not getting it, not getting that what that officer was saying. It was, he was representing keeping a monarchy in power, a terrible, horrific, brutalizing monarchy in power that was, impoverishing and immiserating its people, and not saying that the Kaiser's forces were, whatever. But I remember that what you're describing there, like that type of like being confronted with something for that first time, and wondering, how could that be? How could they mutiny like that? How could they desert like that? And I think that started things going on in my head about, well, maybe things aren't always as they may seem. I'll always remember that scene from Dr. Zhivago. I always remember that, and it really did, it had an impact on me in terms of, okay, maybe I need to think a little different about this. Yeah. So, but yeah.
So we might have some active duty military in the audience. As we wrap this up, anything you'd want to say to them? Any words of advice if they're questioning their service, given the current use of the military?
Well, first, if they are down in their service and if they want to get out, or they don't want to deploy, or they're just curious as to what their rights are as uniformed service members, to dissent, or to disobey even. There are two organizations. There's a GI Rights Hotline, and then there's the Center for Conscience for Conscience and More, and to look up those organizations. We all are at some point on a journey, and as a 52-year-old man, like the journey, as I'm in middle, solidly, past middle age now, the idea being that the journey never stops, and you're constantly developing, you're constantly going through your story through history. But I would say, assess where you are in your journey, what part of your story you're in. Have you seen enough? Have you experienced enough? Do you know enough already that whatever's holding you back from dissenting is simply just trappings, is simply just fear, is simply just discomfort? Maybe some folks are hearing people talk like this for the first time, and that's great. you know, and that's always been my thing to people is you meet people at where they're at. You talk to them where they're at, you know. So if you're active duty and you're watching this and this is resounding with you, okay, take a look at yourself and where are you? And what should you be doing now in response to that? You know, maybe for some of you, maybe it's to continue to stay in for another enlistment, right? I don't recommend staying in thinking you're going to change it from the inside. It doesn't work that way. But certainly, if you want to continue to get more experience to have feel like you have a better appreciation for it all, of course. Now, if you're going to deploy and take part in something you don't believe in, that's another story. And now you're starting to get into the realm of what will my conscience, what will my soul say, you know, years from now. And that's why I say you have to assess where you're at and then go from there in terms of how you dissent, how you disobey. Um, yeah, it is. It's a tough position to be in. I waited way too long with my dissent, with my refusal to take part any longer, because I just lied to myself over and over again. And once a lie didn't work for me anymore to justify staying involved with the wars, then I created a new lie for myself. And then it became a duality, or then it became just so bad. I was so intellectually and morally broken that suicide seemed like an option. So when I go to Afghanistan, like in my head, I'm thinking like, well, it's better to die over there than to die here, you know? So don't let yourself get to that point by any means. But like I said, be honest with yourself, take an assessment of yourself, see where you are, and then proceed with what's best for yourself. But if you're at that point, we're ready to ascend, then do it.
Well said. And I must say, when you did make the decision to dissent, you did one hell of a job. You crushed it. And I
Dude,
mean,
that was the character that my life most resembles is Forrest Gump. All of that stuff just happened, circumstance, luck, chance, whatever. Yeah, all that high profile descent that I had. There are a lot of factors involved in that, and chance and luck were at the top of that. So yeah, yeah. But I appreciate it though, John. Thank you for saying that.
because I mean, I hear the stories about a lot of people who spoke out, who dissented, and it's like they get persecuted, they get imprisoned. Like you really were like had your like shit squared away tight. Like you really knew what you were doing, and you really did like just a tremendous service to America and to humanity. And I mean, if ever you talk about like then you're going on um, like MSNBC so much that the makeup ladies have to like
Yeah,
keep your TV makeup on hand
right.
because it was
I did. I really thought I had made it. You know.
because the people in power in the Obama administration realized, oh, this is true.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, we're going to play our political games, but we need someone speaking this truth.
Right. Yeah. That is as I. No one's ever walked up to me and said that. I shouldn't say that. I did have people from administration tell me to keep speaking publicly because I was helping them arguing against the war. And what happens with my dissent, for people who don't know, it occurs during the escalation of the Afghan war in 2009. I resigned in protest over that war from my position with the State Department in Afghanistan. And I end up on the front page of the Washington Post. A few days later, I'm on the Today Show. And it's just a lot of media attention. And this is a different time. 2009, the media was much, much different than today. If someone were to do that today, same circumstances, everything's the same, except we have today's media. No, it wouldn't work the same. If I did that now, I would not be on the front page of the Washington Post. I would not have been on the Today Show, on Monday morning with Matt Lauer. No, that wouldn't be the way, because the media is just so different than it was. But what occurs is that the Obama administration, when he escalates the war, he says, okay, we're going to escalate this war, but in 18 months, we're going to wind the war down. We're essentially going to declare victory and go home. And so for the first year and a half, as I was speaking out maybe about the first year, because I start to get used more. But for them, is there's pushback against me. But then, as myself and many others too, speaking against the war, as we start to get into 2011, and as the war is supposed to begin to be wound down in 6 months, there are, of course, those out there saying, look, it's been successful. People just lying out their ass about that. It's been successful. We can come home, complete lies. But then there are also, too, they're calling on those of us who have been saying all along, it's never going to be successful. Get out. So those of us also making the argument of just, so there was this period of time where I was on MSNBC quite a bit, because that channel was tied directly to the White House, as Cenk Uygur, will tell you about. And then what happens, though, is in 2012, MSNBC makes a decision to go along overtly with the Fox News model. So everyone knew that MSNBC was aligned with the Democratic Party, got their talking points from the White House, et cetera. But it was all they tried to keep it on the down low. They tried to keep it, they didn't want that to be clear. But then in 2012, they abandoned that, and they went with the Fox News model, where they were clearly in a Democratic Party camp, and their ratings did better for it. But at that time, when they switched that model, and this is, I think, an aspect you see particularly from then on throughout corporate media, the dynamic needed to be team red versus team blue. So when you're doing that much, when I was doing that much at MSNBC, particularly in Washington, D.C., being in the green room there up at American University, you get to know like other people who were in the green room with you, because you'd see them once or twice a week. And, those of us who weren't there representing team red or team blue, people who were trying to be, essentially at that point, I was trying to be an objective observer, no, they didn't want you. Unless you were on team red or team blue, they didn't want you, so, which again was the Fox News model. And I could actually tell you a real quick, funny story. I mentioned Tom Cotton. I knew Tom Cotton in Afghanistan. We overlapped for a week together in Logman province. And when I'm dissenting from the war publicly and I'm going on Fox News and other things, I start debating Tom Cotton. He was put forward by Concerned Veterans of America. I think it was CVA. I think that's who it was, to, offer a face or a voice supporting the escalation of the Afghan war. So Tom and I, a number of times, debated one another on cable news. We were on Larry King together. We did a number of hits on Fox News together. And then one day he calls me and he says, hey, I just spoke with a producer at Fox. And this would have been like early 2010. I just spoke with a producer at Fox. You and I are not going to be on the air anymore together. And I said, oh, really? What happened? What's wrong? He said, because, they said that we're too cordial to one another, so that's the reality of it. That's the entertainment aspect of corporate news that, really dominates their decision-making.
You've reminded me of something that I'd forgotten about, which is that yeah, we do have really good propaganda. You've restored my faith in our propaganda, Captain, because despite the current regime's just shocking ineptitude at narrative management, but it is really fascinating to compare us to like North Korea.
Yeah.
Where in North Korea, you would never turn on the television and see someone ranting against. I mean, I'm just assuming, I haven't been there or studied it. But from what I understand, you wouldn't turn on your television in North Korea and see North Korean state media have some guy on to like lash out at the dear leader. But you get that here. You get we'll have half the country think this guy's evil. We'll have the other half think he's great, and then we'll switch.
Yeah.
And so like you can't rule for 30 years like in North Korea, but the state gets to have so much more power.
Right. I mean, even to look at, we can compare the American political system with the Iranian political system, essentially an oligarchy and a theocracy. They have democracy in Iran. They get to vote for the president, and they have presidents who are different from one another. Pezeshkian, the current president, is different than Raisi was, the previous. One guy was a conservative. This guy's more of a reformer. They have two camps, essentially, conservatives and reformers, right? just like we have two camps, Democrats and Republicans. Everyone who runs, though, particularly at those higher levels in Iran, are vetted and approved for by the religious authorities, right? So is that really democracy? The fact that the Iranian people can pick their leader, but it only comes from it's only people that are approved of by another authority that's unaccountable to the people. And I know we can get into how the Iranians do it, but and then you look at the American system. Yeah, we essentially have two candidates for president here. One is liberal, one is conservative, and both of them are selected through unaccountable political parties, and that very often report to the very same oligarchs, the same donors. I mean, certainly, when was the last time there was an open primary in the Democratic Party? You got to go back to 2008. It's been almost 20 years since Democratic Party voters have had a fair, as we would call a fair, a fair chance at nominating their party leader, their party's candidate for president. I mean, certainly 12, there was nothing. Obama was 16, the DNC rigged that. In 20 as well, the hand of the DNC ensured that Sanders couldn't win. 24, as we all know, there was nothing. I mean, so how different then is the American system from the Iranian system in terms of how much does the people actually have a say in those who govern? And it's a question of oligarchy versus theocracy. And I'm not in favor of either of them,
Yeah, they're not going to let you on CNN with those talking points.
No, they're not.
The approved talking point is Iran is not a normal country.
I last time I was on CNN was 2014, and I was on there quite a bit talking about Syria, and then finally they just didn't have me on anymore. No explanation, no anything. My line on Syria at that point was that we need to exercise restraint, and I would speak about how the Islamic State is a creation of our making, and how if we think that just basically carrying out another Iraq war, but this time in Syria, is going to lead to anything other than the creation of more Islamic states, right? I mean, that type of argument. And yeah, they stopped talking to me. Yeah, that was it. I remember the anchor Brooke Baldwin described me as the lone dove in a sea of hawks. That's what she said. Yeah.
Well, you're always welcome here at Anarchic, Areopagita, to come tell the truth with the force of your moral convictions. We love it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'd much rather be here than on CNN or any of those things any day. Absolutely. So thanks, John, for what you do. And again, thank you for what the Libertarian Institute does.
Thank you so much, Captain.